Hi there, this is your narrator Ali, and I hope you are ready to relax and hear the story of Prophet Salih and the people of Thamud, a powerful civilization that carved its homes into mountains and felt invincible in their wealth and stone fortresses. A wind carves its way through a rocky valley. It moves over stone facades etched into the mountainside, across empty courtyards and wells that no one draws from anymore. These are the remains of a people who once believed they would last forever. Their homes are still standing, but their voices are gone. This is the story of that people, the tribe of Thamud, and of the man who walked among them with a message they did not want to hear. It is the story of Prophet Salih, of a miraculous she-camel that stepped out of solid rock, and of the thunderous moment when a whole nation learned too late that stone cannot protect you from the decree of the one who created it. What you are about to hear is not just ancient history. It is a mirror held up to every age that feels safe in its power and blind in its comfort. Chapter 1. A Nation Chiseled from Stone. After the people of Ad were swept from the earth by a relentless wind, their memory hung over Arabia like a warning. Yet human beings forget quickly. In time, another people rose to fill the emptiness they left behind. They were called Thamud. Their lands lay further north, in a place of sandstone cliffs and steep ridges, along valleys that would one day be known as Al-Hijr and Al-Ula. Here, the mountains were not distant silhouettes on the horizon. They were close, looming, wrapped around the settlements like great sleeping beasts. The people of Thamud learned to treat those mountains as their companions. The rock of their region was soft enough to carve yet hard enough to endure, and they took full advantage of this gift. With patient hands, they chiseled doorways directly into cliff faces, hollowed out rooms, and decorated facades with columns and frames. From the plains, their cities looked like something between a natural wonder and an open-air palace. The mountain itself transformed into a continuous row of houses and halls. On the flatlands below, they built high structures, pillars, and watchtowers. Their architecture was not merely functional, it was a statement. We are here and we are strong. Their trade routes connected south and north. Caravans passed through with spices, incense, and goods, bringing wealth and stories from distant lands. As their material prosperity increased, something else began to grow inside them, a quiet conviction that they were secure. The rock under their homes felt unshakable. The hills around them felt like natural fortresses. Tyranny took root in that sense of safety. Rulers emerged who cared more for their own pleasure than for justice. Voices that questioned them were pushed aside. Spiritually, Thamud followed a path not so different from Ad. They knew of the Creator, the story of Nuh, of Hud, and of the people drowned or blown away for their arrogance, had traveled across deserts and campfires. Yet they slipped into the same error. They scattered idols through their cities, symbols of rain, prosperity, fertility, and protection. They took pride in the ways of their ancestors, repeating ancient rituals without asking what they meant. In their minds, they were simply honoring tradition. In truth, they were drifting further and further from the one who had raised the mountains and softened the rock for their tools. From above, their region looked magnificent. Carved hills glowing in the sun, fields stretching between them, wells full of water, roads busy with trade. From within, an unseen sickness was spreading. Pride without gratitude, power without humility. And as had happened before with other nations, the response to that sickness came in the form of a man. Chapter 2. The Young Man of Hope. Among the tribe of Thamud, there was a man whose name was Salih. He was not an outsider from another people. He was born among them, carried their blood, spoke their language with its familiar accent, knew their stories and songs. His lineage traced back through Thamud ibn Athir, through Iram, all the way to Nuh. From a young age, Salih carried a quiet dignity. The elders of his people watched him grow with a kind of hopeful expectation. He was sharp-minded, gentle in speech, and fair in judgment. When disputes broke out, people often suggested, "Let Salih decide between us." He came to be seen as a figure of good hope, someone who might one day lead them, representing their tribe in councils and negotiations. He watched the same world everyone else saw, the carved homes, grand buildings, crowded marketplaces, but he noticed what others ignored. He saw poor men being pushed from the path so that the powerful could pass. He heard the laughter of those who mocked any mention of accountability in the hereafter. He saw people bowing to statues whose faces had been shaped by their own chisels and hands. Inside, something in him recoiled. His heart knew that the one who created the sky, who shaped the mountains and gave the rock its layers, could not be represented by these silent figures. He believed in a God who sees beyond stone, a Lord who judges with justice and whose favors cannot be counted. Then, in a way that only Allah knows, revelation came. The young man of hope became a messenger of hope and warning. Salih was chosen to carry a message to his people, to call them back to the worship of Allah alone, and to remind them that the rock they trusted so much could not shield them from divine judgment. Before this calling, he had enjoyed their admiration. After it, he would face their anger. But prophets are not chosen to be comfortable. They are chosen to be truthful. And so Salih stepped into his new responsibility, knowing that the respect of his people might be the first thing he would lose. Chapter 3. A call. Echoing in the canyons, the day soon came when Salih stood before his people as more than an admired youth. Perhaps it was in a central plaza between the cliffs, where carved facades rose around an open space, and the sound of voices echoed softly between rock walls. Traders were arranging wares, women were filling jars at the well, children played among the shadows of the mountain homes. Salih's voice rose above the everyday noise, steady and clear. He did not begin with arguments or clever phrases. He began with the oldest call in human history. "My people worship Allah alone. You have no true God besides Him." He reminded them that the Lord they claimed to believe in had given them everything they were so proud of: the skill to carve, the intelligence to design, the strong bodies to wield pick and hammer. He pointed to the mountains that wrapped around them. "He is the one who made these stones soft enough for your tools, yet strong enough to shelter you. He made you successors after the people of Ad, giving you a new chance to live with gratitude instead of pride." The words did not fall into silence. The people murmured, exchanging glances. To many, Salih's voice was familiar, but what he said was not. Until then, he had been the young man everyone respected, someone they hoped might become a chief. Now he was telling them to leave the gods their fathers had honored and to devote worship entirely to the unseen Lord. They answered him with a mixture of sadness and suspicion. "Salih," they said in their gatherings, "you were our hope. We thought you would lead us. Now you come with something strange. You ask us to abandon what our parents practiced and what their parents before them believed. How can we throw away generations of tradition because of the words of one man?" They claim to be uncertain. "We are in deep doubt about what you are calling us to." But their doubt was not the kind that searches for truth. It was the kind that hides behind habit. They did not ask, "Is this message right?" but rather, "How can we leave what we are used to?" Still, a small number among them felt something move in their hearts. They had always sensed emptiness in their rituals, unease in their leader's arrogance. Salih's words gave shape to that unease. Quietly, they began to believe. For the rest, Salih's call marked the beginning of a long contest between a man who wanted good for his people and a people who wanted him to remain who he used to be. Chapter 4. Demands from the Doubters. The chiefs of Thamud were not prepared to let the matter rest. Salih's message threatened the system that kept them at the top. If people began to believe that all power belonged to Allah, the aura around their idols would fade, and with it much of their authority. They tried to discredit him with words. Some whispered that he had been touched by sorcery. Others said grief or solitude had unbalanced his mind. But his calmness and clarity were hard to deny. His past life stood against their accusations. Everyone knew his honesty, his good conduct, his concern for others. When undermining his character failed, they resorted to a more dramatic tactic. They gathered as a group in the presence of his followers and his opponents alike and confronted him openly. "If you truly claim to be a messenger," they said, "then show us a sign. Not just any sign, a sign of our own choosing, a miracle that cannot be confused with tricks or illusions." They pointed to a particular rock in the mountains, a huge boulder standing slightly apart, known to all. From that rock, they demanded, a she-camel should come forth. Not an ordinary one, but a tall, majestic animal, heavily pregnant, unlike anything they had seen. If this happened, they promised, they would believe. Salih looked at their faces and knew, as prophets often do, that their demand was not born of eagerness for truth, but of testing and defiance. Yet he also knew that if the sign was granted, it would leave them with no excuse. He made them swear that if their request was fulfilled exactly as they described, they would accept his message and stop persecuting the believers. They swore. Then Salih turned away, his heart heavy with the responsibility of what he was asking, and prayed. He asked his Lord to bring forth the sign they had demanded, knowing that if it came and they still refused, their destruction would be nearer than they realized. Around him, the people of Thamud waited, some with genuine anticipation, others with hidden smirks, convinced that nothing would happen and that their challenge would embarrass him in front of everyone. Chapter 5. When stone split and life stepped out. The valley of Thamud had seen many things carved from rock, doorways, porticos, carved frames around tombs, but it had never seen rock itself behave like something alive. On the day appointed, people gathered near the huge boulder they had pointed out. The cliffs loomed around them like a circle of watchful giants. The air felt charged, expectant. Some had climbed to higher ledges to watch from above. their silhouettes dark against the sky. Salih stood before the rock and supplicated. He did not chant incantations or perform elaborate rituals. He simply turned to the one who controls stone and flesh alike and asked that the sign be shown. Then, before the eyes of the assembled tribe, the rock shuddered. It trembled as if something inside it were pushing outward. A crack appeared, then widened, its edges glowing with dust. The solid surface bulged, split, and opened. From within came a she-camel, enormous and radiant, heavy with unborn young. Her coat shone in the light. Her stride was calm and powerful, as if she had not just emerged from the impossible, but from a quiet pasture. Silence fell. For a long moment, no one spoke. Children pressed closer to their elders. Some of the men who had demanded this very sign felt their bravado melt into fear. The camel lifted her head, breathing slowly, as if nothing unusual had occurred. For certain hearts, that single sight was enough. Doubt dissolved. They believed, not in the camel, but in the Lord who had brought her forth, and in the messenger standing quietly beside her. They saw this event as a mercy, a second chance for a proud people. But other hearts reacted differently. Instead of softening, they hardened. They told themselves that what they had seen might be magic, or that the camel was an omen whose meaning they would decide at their convenience. Pride whispered that bowing to the truth now would be an admission of weakness they could not bear. Salih addressed the stunned crowd. This camel, he said, was a sign from Allah and a trust placed among them. She was not to be harmed. She would graze freely in the land, and the water of the valley would be divided between her and the people. One day for her to drink, one day for them. In that arrangement was a test. Would they honor the sign they themselves had requested, or would they resent it? Chapter 6. A living sign in the streets of Thamud. In the days that followed, life in Thamud changed in visible ways. It was impossible to ignore the she-camel. She was taller than their other animals, with a presence that seemed to bend conversations around her. When she walked through the valley, people stepped aside, partly in awe, partly in annoyance. On the days assigned to her, she descended to the main well. The people watched as she drank and drank, emptying what had seemed a generous supply of water. No other animal approached on those days. Her right to the water was part of the test they had agreed to. On the other days, the people drank, and their flocks crowded around the wells. Despite her heavy drinking, water always returned in time for them. Her milk was another sign. It flowed in such abundance that many families could drink from it. No one went thirsty on her account. Children who had grown weak from hunger found strength again. The poor, who had often been pushed to the edges of the well on crowded days, now had their share of nourishment secured. For those who believed, every lowing sound from the camel, every calm step she took among the rock-hewn houses, felt like a reminder of Allah's mercy, a visible sign placed right in the midst of their daily routines. But for many of the disbelievers, especially among the powerful, the camel became a thorn in their pride. They began to grumble. This animal is taking our water. Our own cattle shy away when she is near. Her presence splits our community. Some talk more about her than about us. The very sign that should have humbled them became the focus of their resentment. They did not want to remember their promise to believe if the miracle occurred. They wanted Salih to stop speaking, his followers to stop growing, and this animal, this living testimony of their broken promise, to disappear. Their hatred, which had first settled on Salih, slowly shifted toward the camel. To them, she was more than an animal. She was a walking accusation that moved through their streets and grazed on their hillsides, wordlessly reminding them of the truth they were refusing. And so, while some people sat in the shade, sipping her milk with gratitude, others sat in smoky rooms at night, whispering plans for how to rid themselves of her once and for all. Chapter 7. A plot in the night tyranny rarely acts alone. It gathers helpers, often among the restless and impressionable. In Thamud, there were men like this, hot-blooded, eager for glory, hungry for the approval of the chiefs. Among them were two young men whose names would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. The leaders knew that killing the camel openly might create a backlash. There were believers among the people now, and even some doubters who still feared the consequences of touching what had clearly been sent as a sign. So they turned to quieter methods. Some of the women of Thamud, tied by loyalty or desire to the disbelieving elite, were drawn into the plan. One woman, known for her beauty and high status, promised herself in marriage to a man if he would take part in slaying the camel. Another, older but still influential, offered her daughter to a different man on the same condition. Tempted by these offers and the promise of fame, the two young men began seeking accomplices. They whispered to other restless youths, framing the camel as a threat to their prosperity and honor. Slowly, a small band of plotters formed. 9 men in all, according to some reports, men who were willing to take any risk for the sake of personal reward and the approval of their leaders. They studied the camel's habits. They watched where she grazed, when she drank, how she moved through the valley. Each observation became a piece of their plan. They ignored Salih's repeated warnings that the camel belonged to Allah, that harming her would invite a punishment none of them could repel. Inside his home, Salih sensed the danger. Revelation had informed him of their plotting. He walked through the streets, his face marked by concern, and called out yet again, "My people, this camel is not mine. It is a sign from your Lord. Let her graze in peace. Do not harm her, or a punishment will come close." Some listened and trembled. Others smiled bitterly and turned away. The band of conspirators waited for their moment, their hearts beating not with reverence for the Lord of the mountains, but with the thrill of defiance. They believed that if they could strike this sign down, Salih's influence would collapse, and the unsettling call to change would end. They did not realize that they were walking toward the very edge of their nation's existence. Chapter 8. The day the sign fell. The morning of their crime arrived bright and clear, as many mornings had before. The valley smelled of dust warmed by the sun, of distant cooking fires, of animals stirring. To a stranger passing through, nothing would have seemed unusual. Life appeared to be unfolding as it always had. The conspirators positioned themselves where the camel usually passed. Some hid behind rocks, hands tight on their weapons. Others tried to blend into the ordinary movement of the town, so that when the moment came, their attack would seem sudden and unstoppable. When the she-camel appeared, her walk was as calm as ever. She made her way toward the water, the great bulk of her body moving with slow confidence. There was nothing in her demeanor to suggest that this day would be different. Then an arrow flew. It buried itself in her leg. She stumbled, tried to regain her balance, loosed a cry that echoed between the cliffs. Another man rushed forward with a blade, slashing at her other leg. The camel faltered and collapsed, her weight thudding against the earth. Blade met flesh again, and the sign that had emerged from rock now lay bleeding into the dust. For a moment there was a stunned quiet. Then shouts rose. Some cheered, hailing the men who had done it as heroes who had rid them of a burden. Songs were improvised and chants shouted, glorifying their courage. Others stood frozen, horrified, unable to believe what they had seen. A few believers wept openly, not just for the animal, but for what this act meant. The conspirators walked through the town with their chests puffed out, receiving congratulatory claps on their shoulders. At the gatherings of the chiefs, there was laughter and satisfaction. "Now let Salih speak of his camel," they said. "Let him threaten us again. We have taken his sign and brought it down." When news reached Salih, he felt the weight of what had happened. The killing of the camel was not merely a cruelty to an animal. It was the final, intentional rejection of a clear sign they themselves had requested. It was a declaration of war against the message he carried. He went out among them and announced, with sorrow in his voice, that their time was nearly over. They would have 3 more days to live in their homes, he said. 3 days to walk their carved streets, to sleep in their stone chambers, to feel the sun on their faces. Perhaps, even then, some small mercy might have been available if they had fallen to their knees in repentance. But the majority did not feel remorse. Instead, they mocked. "Why 3 days?" they scoffed. "If you are truthful, let the punishment come now. We do not fear your warnings." The sound of their laughter rolled between the mountains. The clock of their existence had begun its final count. Chapter 9. 3 days of color and fear. The 3 days that followed were unlike any others Thamud had known. They woke on the first morning feeling as they always had, proud, defiant, convinced that nothing would happen. But as the sun rose higher, people began to notice a strange change. Faces looked different in the light. The skin of many who had participated in or celebrated the camel's killing had taken on a faint, reddish hue. At first it seemed like a trick of the sun, but it deepened as the day wore on. Mothers looked at their children and saw the color spreading, as if a flush had been painted across their features. Whispers spread, "Do you see it too?" Some remembered Salih's warning and felt a tremor of fear. Others brushed it off as coincidence. The day passed with tension humming underneath ordinary tasks. On the second day, the color shifted. Faces that had been red now turned a sallow yellow, the sickly hue of leaves that have lost their life. People who prided themselves on their health felt a heaviness settle into their limbs. Jokes began to fade. The laughter of the previous day turned brittle, uncertain. The third day dawned, and the change was undeniable. The faces of the doomed turned dark, as if a shadow had settled permanently over their skin. Eyes that once gleamed with confidence now darted nervously. Strong men who had once laughed at the idea of punishment found themselves glancing at the sky, at the ground, at the solid rock of their homes, searching for reassurance and finding none. Some remembered Salih's plea, "Why do you rush to evil instead of asking for mercy?" Now, with time running out, they wished they had asked that question sooner. During these 3 days, another plot unfolded. The same type of men who had conspired against the camel now turned their thoughts toward Salih himself. If they could silence him, perhaps they believed they could silence what he represented. A group swore that they would attack him and his household by night, killing them quietly, then deny any knowledge of it in the morning. They planned in whispers, unaware that their conversation was already known to the one who hears even the thoughts that never reach the tongue. Before their plot could be carried out, Salih received a different kind of command: to leave. He and the believers slipped away from the valley that had been their home, their hearts heavy with grief. They walked between the very cliffs into which their people had carved their security, knowing that behind them a reckoning was approaching. Chapter 10. The shout that shattered Stone Night fell after the third day. The wind moved softly through the valley, touching doors, flowing along carved facades. Lamps burned inside stone rooms. Children slept unaware. Some adults stayed awake, haunted by what they had seen over the last days. Others drank and talked loudly, determined to smother their unease with noise. Then it came. No one could later describe it fully. The scriptures speak of it as a terrible cry, a blast, a thunderous sound that tore through the air and the earth all at once. It was as if the valley itself screamed. The ground shook violently. Walls trembled, vessels rattled and crashed. Hearts seized in terror. People tried to stand and found the world pitching beneath them. The secure rock they had trusted buckled and groaned. The sound was not like anything they had heard in storms. It was sharper, deeper, carrying with it the weight of a final decision. In an instant it was over. When silence returned, it was not the soft quiet of sleep. It was the stillness of lives abruptly cut off. The people of Thamud lay motionless in their homes, their powerful bodies slumped in positions that told of sudden collapse. The carved houses were still there. The pillars remained. The facades on the cliffs continued to catch the light of the rising and setting sun. But inside, there was no movement. A whole civilization had ended in a single breath of divine will. Salih and those who had believed with him were far away by then, protected by the mercy of the one they had trusted. When news of the valley's fate reached them, grief mixed with awe. Salih had spent years pleading with his people, warning them, reasoning with them, hoping for their salvation. Now the time for hope had passed. The story of Thamud was sealed. He turned his back on what had once been his homeland, his voice heavy as he said, in effect, "My people, I delivered the message of my Lord to you. I advised you sincerely, but you did not love those who give you sincere advice." The wind swept through the empty homes of Thamud, carrying away the last echoes of their denial. Chapter 11. Footsteps in a Haunted Valley. Centuries later, another group approached that same valley, this time from the north. The sun was high. The rocks of Al-Hijr shone in shifting colors of red and gold. In the company was a man whose name would be known across the world, Muhammad, the final messenger, traveling with his companions on the way to Tabuk. They passed by the remnants of Thamud's dwellings, the carved facades still impressive, their doorways like silent mouths in the cliffs. Some of the companions drew water from the ancient wells, kneaded dough for bread, and spoke in hushed tones about the people who had once lived there. Their prophet, however, saw more than spectacular architecture. He saw a place where the warning of Allah had come true. He instructed his companions to pour out the water they had taken from most of the wells and to feed the prepared dough to their animals instead. They were told not to linger among those ruins laughing and talking as tourists do, but to pass through with hearts trembling. If you enter the dwellings of those who were punished, he taught them, enter while weeping, and if you do not weep, then do not enter, lest what befell them befall you. In that guidance is a lesson for every generation that looks upon the remains of powerful civilizations and sees only curiosity or romance. The carved homes of Thamud are not simply an archaeological wonder. They are a frozen warning. They remind the living that no structure of stone, no technology, no arrangement of political power can outlast arrogance in the face of truth. The Valley of Thamud still exists, a real place in the world, its rocks bearing mute witness to what happens when a people demand a sign from their Lord and then trample it with their own hands. Closing reflection, echoes between stone and heart. The story of Prophet Salih and the people of Thamud is a story of contrasts. Stone and flesh, miracle and denial, mercy offered, mercy refused. We hear of a people who carved security into mountains and forgot that the one who made the mountains could unmake them. We see a young man, respected and hopeful, choosing the risk of truth over the comfort of admiration. We watch as a living sign steps out of silent rock, only to be cut down, not by ignorance, but by deliberate defiance. In the end, the punishment that came to Thamud was sudden, overwhelming, and precise. Yet it did not come without warning. It followed years of patient calling, of signs, of chances to turn back. Their story tells us that destruction is not born in a moment. It grows quietly, in hearts that prefer pride to humility and habit to reflection. The carved houses of Thamud still stand in the desert, their doorways open to the wind. No voices rise from within them, no lamps glow behind their stone frames. They are like pages of a book left open, asking anyone who passes, "What are the stones in which you trust? What are the signs you have asked for? And have you honored them when they arrived? Are you building your security on what your hands can shape, or on the one who shaped you?" Every age has its own idols and its own mountains. The story of Salih invites each listener to walk through the valleys of their own life with clearer eyes, to hear the echo of that ancient cry before it becomes a present one, and to choose humility while the 3 days of opportunity are still unfolding. For more stories that can help you relax, don't forget to like and subscribe.